I think the hardest thing is there aren't a whole lot of tools that are really good at building games that are also really good at building music.
Peter, one of your friends in the audience asks, for those of us who still think that we can compose better than a computer can, sideways winky emoticon, do you see a future for generative or algorithmic music as an aid to composition or a source for new ideas?
Oh, of course. I mean, creating a generative system, I think, is composing. It's a different kind of composing, but Mozart created music games. All kinds of composers have experimented with how they could systematize things that came out of their imagination. So I think it is composition. I think it's just a different process for expressing the composition. And since all of us as composers also like to break out of our own habits, yeah, it can be a great way of generating ideas and trying new things.
A lot of people see generative art or generative music as a limiter to musicality. They see it as a very sterile environment. It has no emotive process whatsoever. But generative art can mean anything. It could mean that you have a reverb being triggered based on your movements. You can have different score cues based on the emotional state of your character. So it's just different ways of putting together the pieces. So if our musical composition was connected with Legos, and we have these ideas of constructs of 1, 4, 5 chord structures, well, what if we took these Legos and mixed them about and then had someone reorganize? What do we see from that picture? And that's where the beauty comes from generative art. It's not necessarily that it's taking away from what we're trying to convey or taking away from the emotive process, but it's giving us a new option to assemble those pieces.
Brad Pokey asks, I would be interested to hear about any projects the guests know of with iPhone developers doing collaborative music apps. 2 examples he cites, he or she, I'm assuming you're a he, the leaf trombone from the Smule guys.
Yep.
So?
Well, that's the one that comes to mind. I think there'll be more. RJDJs can be collaborative.
Yeah.
RJDJ, these guys took Pure Data, which is a visual programming environment that's also what is inside Spore, doing the music, and they have a bunch of applications that could be collaborative, which make a lot of use of the microphone. So yeah, no, I think there'll be more. Also, it's going to help the 3.0 SDK. People are excited about other features, but I'm most excited about the fact that it will allow iPhones to talk to one another. So there's no question that it's going to show up in a lot of music apps.
I keep telling my students that we're on this, we're at this renaissance point in the game industry. Mark was talking about it earlier, where people are now seeing games as viable and they're not a slacker, commodity in some sort. That now we're starting to see open methods of distribution that are kind of flourishing the progression, and we're seeing all these mom and pop shops, people in their garages making games like Flow, making all these really tiny, impressive, emotive pieces of art. And as that continues, everyone's really interested in the involvement of music's place inside the gaming spectrum. But technologically, we're still very limited in that. And it kind of stems from the fact that game programmers primarily are visual programmers, and that audio programming is a different environment and it requires a different set of tools. So the more that we bridge that gap between a visual environment and an audio environment, the more we're going to see generative music, interactive music, and music as art in games.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of the experiments won't work, of course. But if we can get more people kind of experimenting with them, that'll help. I think the hardest thing is there aren't a whole lot of tools that are really good at building games that are also really good at building music. Music runs at a completely different timing than games, which are usually running at a frame rate. Music is running at audio rate. So video talks in terms of things like 30 frames per second. music talks at levels like 44,100 hertz. So
4 beats per minute.
Absolutely. So I mean that does mean that there is a technical challenge, and it's important to recognize how big a part of the problem that is. But boy, with all these kind of independent people, I feel more hopeful this week than ever before that we're going to see incredible experiments. The guy who wrote the music engine for BrainPipe is a level editor for Valve during the day. So he does long, crunch hours at Valve and comes home and writes a sound engine.
Incredible.
And a lot of the people who are independent developers do have day jobs in the industry.
Sure.
There's incredible experimentation at some of the larger developers too. So from 2-person bedroom operations to experiments that are gestating inside some of those bigger companies, there's a lot of activity. It's really quite exciting.
We have someone asking, the tools we use in game development are generally very specialized. Photoshop, 3ds Max,
3D Studio Max.
3D Studio Max, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
C++, etc. Are either of you hoping to develop more illustrative and elegant tools for creating games like the ones you're talking about?
Well,
I am.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think with the course that I teach, we actually start going through a gambit of different engines, and we start with Unreal Tournament, and we kind of purposely make the students get frustrated, and then we move to what's called middleware, which is like Audio Kinetics Wise or Fmod, and this is like a developer sandbox for audio engineers, but still developed by programmers in the sense.
Yes.
And it's not how audio engineers think. So then we kind of liberate them into an open platform like Maximus P or PD, and we say, now that we've gone through this very restrictive tunnel, you can make whatever you want. And I think the more that we look at programs like processing and Maximus P or PD, programs that have the artistic interest in mind with the development, I think the more we're going to see those boundaries with interactive audio and composition start to fall.
Guitar Hero and Rock Band imitate playing the actual instruments, one of our chat room participants observes. Is music going to shift away from that, or are we ingrained in the way that music is traditionally played? Music starts to go on its own path. Is that what we're going to see in the future?
Well, I personally think that as long as you have a safe net, as long as it's other people's music and you're not risking expression, then you're in a very, very comfortable gaming environment. But the minute that you start to get into this expressive environment, it's emotionally unstable, and therefore it's not as comfortable, it's not as group-oriented, and it's a very difficult, uncharted territory with games. I do not see instruments connecting with game in like very expressive ways to change gameplay, but I do see that we are going to go down the Guitar Hero Rock Band route even further, where we're playing out someone else's existence.
Well, we're certainly not going to see too many more Guitar Heroes and rock bands because they're already here.
Yeah.
So I think that's a real challenge I don't know if we have the answers, but it's a real challenge to game designers to come up with some interesting answers to that. And it's a challenge to us as composers and musicians to play around with the composer-listener relationship. I like the bad musicians concept. A lot of us composers consider ourselves not terribly good musicians, which is why we get into the business of giving our music to someone more talented than us to play for us, which is very nice. But now we can involve the listener in that as well, which is kind of exciting.